Strategy and Policy Committee meeting for May 2021. Welcome everybody. Before we kick off, I'm just going to ask Councillor Tipania who will open us with a kia.
The winds will blow from the west, the winds will blow from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, and the promise of a glorious day. Hakataka te hau ki te uru, hakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake anō te atakura he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei maunga.
Kia ora. So welcome everybody to this morning's committee meeting. Before we open, I just want to acknowledge a couple of things. So you will all be aware that the intention was that we would break this meeting at 10 a.m. to attend the zone meeting to consider a remit to go to the Local Government New Zealand AGM. We won't be doing that this morning. Our agenda doesn't allow us for the time frame, so we won't be attending that meeting this morning. I also want to acknowledge that this is our last committee meeting with Mr. Will Taylor here. He has been our acting GM for the last few months, and it's been fantastic to work with you, Will. It's been such a pleasure to have you alongside me at this table, and I will miss you. We will all miss you, I think, but you're not going far. You're just going next door back to Council of Usage's committee, so we will see you. But thank you for all of the work that you've done, and we will be welcoming Darren Edwards this month, who will be attending our next meeting alongside me. All right, without further ado, apologies and declarations of interest. I have apologies from his work with the Mayor. He has been in Dunedin attending the funeral of Mr. Dave Cullen yesterday, so he's travelling back and will be back with us later this morning, but won't be attending our committee meeting. Do I have any further apologies or declarations? No? If not, can I have somebody move those apologies, please? Good. Thank you, Kelly. Councillor Vucic, second. All in favour? Aye. Those against? No, carried. Thank you. We don't have any deputations this morning, so that brings us to item 4.1 on the agenda, confirmation of previous minutes. Can I have somebody move those minutes, please? Councillor Tipania, seconded Councillor Collard. Thank you. Any matters arising from that? Any notes of clarification or amendment? Any comments? No? If not, I will put it to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? No? Carried. Thank you. Item 5.1, proposal for a treated water supply bylaw. For getting it on the table before I ask staff to speak to this, can I have a mover of this report, please? Councillor Stratford, seconded by Councillor Clendon. Thank you. We will now hand over to you, Will, for any staff comments.
Thank you very much, Chair. This bylaw is very similar to the previous bylaw, but its language has been updated and modernised, so members shouldn't see too much difference. I'm going to ask Donald or Shan if they would like to make a comment.
Good morning. Basically, this bylaw is very similar to the previous one. It's needed as a new bylaw because the review date for the previous bylaw was missed, and it was going to automatically revoke in October this year. So we're on a relatively fast time frame to make the new bylaw. As I said, the content is very similar. The main new area relates to some terms and conditions around building and excavating around pipes and water mains. So I think that's it as a summary.
Thank you, Donald. Does anybody have any questions for Donald or comments on the report? Councillor Stratford.
Through the Chair, my only question on this report is there enough resource and time to get the water bylaw in place before revocation or summer 2021, because we need it to do the, oh my gosh, what have we been doing every year? Water restrictions.
Thank you, Chair. Staff believe that there is enough time to get this done. If there are any detailed technical questions on the report, I should have said at the outset, Chair, we've got both Ruben and Jay online who can come in, but we believe that there is sufficient time to do this work.
Thank you, Will. Councillor Cleland.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of minor questions. One is that there's reference in the draft to our engineering standards revised 2009. I thought we had a more recent revision than that, though I may be completely wrong. And if so, what we just accommodate a later update. That's one question. I just wonder in the submission form, if there ought not to be a box at the end for general comments, because at the minute we ask a series of specific questions. And I just wonder if there ought to be an opportunity to make some more general comments from people, which is often the case. I note that when we ask people which ward they live in, we offer them Bay of Islands, Hokianga or Te Hiku. And people in Kaikoui might feel a bit left out. That's a small point, but I think we should use the correct ward names. More substantially, the one concern I have about is the amount of time allowed for submissions. Requiring people to have it done by 31st of May, I think is a bit tough. It's now the 4th of May, it's scarcely 4 weeks. Some organisations might want to submit on this. The point's made, it is quite a big deal, water. So I do wonder, the point about organisations is obviously they often only meet once a month. So I think we might be making it a little bit difficult for people to get a solid submission in. I recognise at the other end is, I think from the 31st of May to the 23rd September is about 14 weeks. The staff would have to update to make it presentable for that council meeting. So I wonder if we might not add a couple of weeks to the submission date, extend that for a couple of weeks, recognising that's putting a wee bit more pressure on staff at the other end. But I would have thought 12 weeks would be sufficient. And at worst case scenario, we have until the 16th of October. We could always do a very fast online special meeting, a week before that date in order to pass the document. So that's my only substantive concern, is to say that we should extend the submission date by about 2 weeks to the middle of June.
Through you, Chair, it is an issue that we discussed. We felt that we had just about the balance right. Councillor Clanton is, of course, is correct in saying that under normal circumstances, particularly if there was to be significant changes being proposed, we would want to allow more time. We believe we've got it right, but I'm going to ask Roger how much slack there is in the system to allow us to give an extra couple of weeks.
Sure. So the project plan's been put together around the council reporting dates and timetable. So we're working towards that, and we do need time, lessons learned from previous bylaws, to take the feedback from public consultation and allow time to analyse that and come back with a draft to be adopted by council. So hence the reason why we're doing that. However, if it's room for having extraordinary meetings, we can do that, but that's not the preference for us. We'd like to stick to the reporting timetable that we have in the council.
You satisfied with that, Councillor Cleland?
Well, yeah, I'd still prefer, I think, to extend that available submission. I could move an amendment for this to push the date back.
I just want to ask Will and the Chair. Roger, if you took a week off staff's time to do the analysis to give the councillors a week of extra consulting time, is that a halfway place that potentially doesn't interfere with the schedule?
I need to look at it. We're very tight. At the moment, the way it's clean planned out is no slack. So we are working on that. So if we take a week out of there, it's a week somewhere we've got to make up to make that date. We're working towards a revoke date, 20th of October.
Through the Chair, I invite the councillors' comment on that, but I know you and I would take it offline and try and make that compromise working with Roger. Is that enough, or would you rather instruct us to make it work?
I love bossing you guys around, but that I genuinely think that we have already contemplated, despite our best efforts with the major consultations we've been doing, people are still saying we didn't give them enough time. And in this case, I do think it's pretty marginal. So I'm happy to negotiate a meeting through.
Through your Chair, if I might, I think the Chief Executive makes a really. I think the phrase is realpolitik, which is the Russian for to to come up with a practical solution, and I think this is a really good compromise. So Roger and I will work and see if we can magic something along the lines that Councillor Clarendon is proposing.
Thank you. I think that Councillor Glenda makes a really good point that if it's a matter of calling an extraordinary council meeting in order to extend consultation period, then that should definitely be considered, and members are open to that. So, thank you. Did you want to add anything to that, Councillor?
That's what I was going to say.
Great, thank you. Just to comment on the engineering standards and also confirmation that that feedback that Councillor Clendon has given on the consultation form particularly will be captured. I believe the engineering standards are in draft at the moment alongside the district plan, is what we heard in the district plan workshops. I think that's the case anyway.
I just wonder though, having embedded that 2009 version in here, does that mean we can only ever reference those in relation to this bylaw? Would it be better simply to say the current role or something? I don't know. Maybe I'm tripping over.
We can make amendments to the bylaw and with changes like that, so there are just minor amendments. If it's not significant, so yeah.
That's great, thank you. Councillor Court.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a more philosophical question, really, and that is, in light of last week's workshop on representation review and the conversation that we want to have that we are a district, why is it necessary to ask what ward someone is from when we're asking for consultation on matters such as bylaws? I can understand that that might be pertinent if we were talking at a community level about the allocation of a ward rate or a ward-specific solution, but my preference is that we change the language to recognise that this is a district. So could someone enlighten me why that's there?
Great question.
Through you, Chair, I mean, you know me, the champion of localism, and normally we like to capture as much local data as possible. However, there's not that much local about something on a ward basis. Is there a technical or legislative reason, Roger, why?
I'll ask people, but I think probably an oversight, is that be fair? Or
I think it's not oversight, it's
is
just
it?
standard practice.
Right, okay.
Right. So through you, Chair, if it's the committee's wish that we would take that off, then we can delete that.
Oh, it's standard practice, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah.
Through comms and engagement.
Through comms and engagement practices, yeah.
Can I just push back on that? Just because something's what we've always done doesn't mean that it's something we should always do. And there needs to be a rational reason for it. And we need to change the conversation. We've agreed it is at a council level that we need to change the conversation that we are district councillors and we are representing a district, and wards only exist for the purposes of elections at this level. So we perpetuate the myth by continuing to put this kind of language in our consultation documents.
Thank you, Councillor Court. How would the committee like to proceed with that? Sorry, I just want to take one thing at a time. Lots of hands. Is there any opposition to asking Will and the CEO to remove that from the consultation?
Yes.
There is?
Yes.
I would not remove it, but consider asking where someone lives, because it's that could feed into obviously what system they had or what system they receive what systems they're using. Ward-based, well, that doesn't actually feed us any information.
I beg to differ.
Yeah, I don't mind giving the address, that gives us the ward, but I don't want to lose the information. The ward is important. We have community boards, we exist in wards, so that's not just for the election. They actually provide a good localism, as well as pointed out. And I'm a localism fan as well, so having that information is good to see what the different feedback, because the problem is actually quite varied. That's my point. So
Thank you, Councillor Research. And sorry, Deputy Mayor Court, we are in a formal meeting. I think maybe at this point it's a more principled conversation that we need to take offline in terms of the way that we do our consultation. But at this point, I'm hearing that we might need to leave it in for this one in particular, with an assurance that we can continue this conversation at a higher level across the board.
Madam Chair, if I might, I would like this conversation to continue, because this is a bylaw. And with respect to Councillor Pesage's comment, I was very clear that at a community board level, words matter. At a council level, when we're making decisions on behalf of the district, we are district councillors, and wards should not bear fruit in our decision making when we're considering a policy that applies to the whole district. So I would like to continue this conversation.
Would anybody like to speak in support of Councillor Court's?
I think a halfway point could be to just simply ask where someone lives. Them telling us where their community, the community they live in, will tell us which ward they live in, while not perpetuating the fact that we've got don't know on there too, you know. Tell us where you live, that will tell us which ward you're in as a given.
I personally agree with Councillor Court, is that this is a district-wide. We are working to a standard level of service with our water delivery across the district, and I do struggle to understand. Councillor Foy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to bring up a case study example of why different areas are different, and I've already brought it up in previous workshops. Case in point, the second fastest growing area of our district, Doubtless Bay, which is different to every single other area in our district because it is reliant on a public, not a public supply, it's a private water reticulation and a private water supply that will determine the growth of the area for reticulated water supply and therefore have an impact on our new district plan. I've already raised this in terms of our subdivision provisions, and I've already asked our infrastructure team how this will be addressed in our infrastructure strategy, considering a significant risk for growth when the growth is reliant on both reticulated sewage and potable water to ensure sustainable outcomes for the community. This is not addressed at all in the bylaw, and I am aware that the district plan is being worked on currently, but I'm also aware that the infrastructure strategy is silent on that currently, and I see it as a risk for our district, and that's why I'm bringing it up here. I'm not sure if the staff are going to comment on that, but this is the strategy committee, and we have our district plan coming up, and it needs to be addressed through the infrastructure committee about operationally how that's a risk, and in terms of strategy, how we will long-term plan that to ensure that that does not affect our potential growth or restrict our growth.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd. Councillor Glendon.
The staff, Madam Chair, the staff able to comment on that, please?
Briefly, I am aware that we did entertain this debate when we initially started this process, so I'm very mindful of keeping the debate on point to the report in front of us and the decision in front of us. If there are any brief comments that can be made, then I welcome those. Other than that,
as long as the staff direct me when it will be addressed and how it will be addressed, we can address it at that time.
A brief comment, if I might, Chair, on point and not getting diverted. My reading of this is that, and I'm sorry to give you on the one hand this, on the other hand that sort of answer, but as Councillor Court said at the outset, it is a bit of a philosophical question, and that makes it no less important for that. But I think it's much wider than just this bylaw, and I think the two ways that I look at this. On the one hand, we do not want to collect more information than we need, and at the same time, I believe the Deputy Mayor's comment is about this oneness of being a district and not a collection of 3 wards, and I think that has significant strength, particularly on the legislative role of elected members, and I think that's where the Deputy Mayor is coming from. On the other hand, it may be that there are instances where we need to collect locally based information. I'm not convinced that wards are the best way to do that myself. I think in other countries they use enumeration districts, very small blocks of 2 or 3 streets, so you can get local information when it's appropriate. So what I would suggest, if it's not going too far off track, Chair, is that if the chief executive and SLT could go away and work up a policy in the generality about how we deal with information, but when we ask for ward-based information, when we don't ask for it, and when sometimes we might ask for more local information, we could do that offline. That might be the best way forward.
Thank you, Will. I think that comes back to the point that I asked Councillor Court if she would be happy with, and she's indicated that she's not. So I do think that there are areas that we can look at, including the significance and engagement policy, but unfortunately it doesn't solve our issue for right now. So I'm just struggling to get a feel from the room as to how we're going to solve this issue in a timely manner. Councillor Stratford.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I think you called me
What
earlier.
Will said did not address my.
Sorry, I've got 3 people talking now.
Sorry, Councillor Clinton, I was waiting since John Busich put his hand up before. But I was just really patient. When data is analysed ward by ward when it comes to a bylaw, the way that I interpret it is, okay, there's more submissions usually from the east and less from the west and Te Huku, but I can still see what those 2 wards to the west and the north are saying in volume in comparison to the east. If we put it all together, we can't see that the east are saying one thing over the west and the north, and that's what happens across a lot of decisions that are made at this table. So that's why I believe the wards need to stay in there, but with the right names. And yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Still staying on the same point of whether or not to remove the wards from the consultation. Councillor Busich, did you want to speak on that briefly?
Very quickly, I prefer what Will said offline. It's a bigger conversation, and given where the government's signalling far greater amalgamation of councils, bylaws probably should be broken down into different areas, because you can't do one policy that covers more than New Zealand. That's just plain nuts, and that's the biggest assumption error I think that central government's making in its approach of centralisation. So I think that having that information allows us to do better local government, and I don't want to lose local government in the picture.
So you're in support of retaining the wards?
Retain the wards, but have this conversation offline, and perhaps get away with things.
Councillor Clendon?
Yeah, I think retain it. I think we should always ask for some sort of location information in all our consultation, because that will highlight if we are missing people. If we find we're getting heaps of feedback from one area or another and virtually nothing, that indicates to us we have a comms problem in one particular area, or a trust problem or something. But I think it's useful data to accumulate over time in all our consultation, specifically in order, as I say, to make sure that we're putting our effort where it needs to be. And also, as Kelly commented, that if we're getting distinctly different feedback from different areas, there's information there, and there's something useful to be gained from that. So I do think it does have value.
Thank you, Councillor Clendon. Councillor Court, unfortunately at this point I've had indication of retaining that, so I'm going to have to rule that we will leave it in there, but thank you for entertaining that. Coming back to the report.
Madam Chair, I did know that Councillor Collard has been signaling for a while. Do you want to speak?
Apologies, Councillor Collard.
Yeah, I wanted to support the wards being there and look at the one step further, besides just identifying the area where the talk is coming from, is that with the consultation or the submissions coming in, does it determine that they are living in our area and not perhaps living in Auckland or somewhere else, and perhaps not so relevant in terms of what we're trying to do?
Thank you, Councillor Collard. Do I have any further debate on that particular issue? No? Thank you for that. We will return back to speaking on the report. Felicity, I had you next if you have further comments to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to hear from the staff about how dangerous activities, specifically in Doubtless Bay, for potable use from a private water supply, which is a key difference to the rest of the district, and that will be addressed in the infrastructure strategy and or the district plan, and for staff to comment on that and the timing. I'm not sure if Jay or Ruben.
I'm happy to briefly comment on that if
I'll
required.
allow. Thank you, Ruben.
Cool. Okay. Because the Doubtless Bay Water Supply Scheme is private, we haven't considered it under the current infrastructure strategy because we have no control over it, nor any responsibility in respect of the future use of that supply. I take Councillor Foy's point in respect of infrastructure services of that nature having a potentially significant role to play in future development. And I would suggest that is a matter that would be contemplated through land use provisions within the district plan review, particularly when it comes to constraints around servicing with private water supply schemes. The long-term servicing of that community through water supplies is something that could potentially be contemplated through future infrastructure strategies if that's the direction that elected members or the council provides the infrastructure group. But for the time being, because it is a private water supply scheme and we have very limited responsibilities in respect of that scheme, it's not something that we're currently covering within our strategic direction.
Thank you for that, Ruben. I think it's important that our bylaws talk about other strategic documents, but I look forward to Councillor Foy picking that up through her infrastructure committee. So thank you for that clarification. Councillor Tipanea.
Thank you, Chair Smith. I wanted to speak in favour of pushing out the submission period, and I didn't actually get where we were at then in terms of the possibility that with this conversation that will be had at an organisational level and how that will be reflected in our recommendation here today. I also am neither here nor there whether it be conducted by the whole committee or a subcommittee, but wanted to ask if it would be captured, the oral hearing, so that all members of the committee can reference it, and also state that if it is in fact on Tuesday the 8th of June that oral presentations will be had. I am also in two other places at the same time, which is Creative Communities and the Northern Adventure Experience meeting on that date.
Thank you.
I don't know how I can be at three.
Thank you, Councillor Tipanea. Hannah has suggested amendment to point C of the resolution that the committee agrees the period for making written submissions on the proposal be agreed upon between Chairperson Smith, Councillor Clendon and the Chief Executive Officer. Is anybody in opposition to that amendment? I'm happy to put that amendment up. Do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Clendon.
Please restate the amendment.
Yes. Can we put it on the screen, please? So that the amendment reads, point C, the committee agrees the period for making written submissions on the proposal be agreed upon between Chairperson Smith, Councillor Clendon and the Chief Executive Officer. That amendment has been moved and seconded. Do I have any opposition to that amendment?
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Court.
I'm going to speak. The reason I oppose it is that we are not officers of the council, we are governors. And in doing so, it is our job to take the officer's recommendation and report about what they can realistically and reasonably achieve within the time period and to maintain that we stay legal. The trouble I have, and you'll be aware that I sent some emails yesterday, is that we have 3 bylaws up for consideration, beg your pardon, 4 bylaws up for consideration in today's strategy agenda. We have a separate bylaw up for consideration in the regulatory agenda this afternoon, although there is some overlap. And what we don't have is collective oversight of the sum total of bylaws that are being reviewed at the moment. and the staff and resources and capacity to deliver those on time and keep us legal. So if we start moving timelines in isolation from having that complete picture, we put the entire process at jeopardy and potentially put our staff under stress. This is a treated water supply bylaw that has had limited interest. I think 3 weeks is sufficient time for people to be able to respond. Having said that, I think the message that Councillor Clinton has raised is a valid one, and we should take that on board moving forward to make sure that we do have sufficient time to adequately consult on bylaws. But my concern remains that we're making a decision in isolation from having a complete picture, and that worries me.
Councillor Bush, do I have further comments on the amendment? Councillor Clinton and Councillor Beatrice.
Simply to support it. I mean, I take Councillor Court's point, but the report does say that council staff expect there'll be a reasonably high level of interest in the draft bylaw. And her point about workload, we don't have a clear view of that, obviously, but that's the point of the negotiation with the CEO. We don't want to put unreasonable demands on staff, but nor do we want to put unreasonable demands on our communities who have a valid interest. I mean, water supply is a pretty fundamental service of council. We need to make sure we've got a good mandate, I think, from our community. And we're talking about a week or two at most.
Can we,
Thank you,
that
Councillor
conversation,
Clinton. Sorry, Councillor.
the main, could still be the day after that conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Tiffany. Councillor Busick.
I support it very quickly, and the reason I support it, I'm actually, if I read it's not up there, but if I understand what was said in the amendment, it's going to be in the hands of yourselves as elected members, and I presume you would sit down and look at the time and negotiate what is reasonable and fair, given everything that Councillor Clinton has raised. So I'm confident.
Thank you, Councillor Busick. Do I have further comments on the amendment? Will, did you or the CEO want to make any comments on this amendment?
I think the only comment I would make, Chair, and Sean might want to come in, is that we are very cognisant that this is a council which prides itself in its ability to listen to its constituents, and and I think we've got a decent track record as a council. When we look at the consultation process that's just been completed, we did it, I think, with some aplomb. And the truncated nature of this particular consultation exercise is only because we're under a heck of a lot of pressure to get stuff done, and as Councillor Court says, a lot of stuff done in a very short period of time. All that being said, I think that between Chief Executive and I and members, we fashion something which would be to everyone's liking. We try and do that.
Thank you, Will. At that point, I'm happy to put this amendment to the vote. So Kim, if we could get that back up on the screen, please. It's been moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Clinton. So the amendment that the Strategy and Policy Committee C agrees the period for making written submissions on the proposal be agreed upon between Chairperson Smith, Councillor Clinton and the Chief Executive Officer. All in favour of the amendment?
Aye.
Those against? Councillor Court, would you like that recorded? Thank you. That has been carried and now become part of the substantive motion. So we come back to comments on the report, and I have Member Ward next.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I had a couple of questions to ask. I'm not sure where this one fits, but in relation to the interpretation on the supply, I couldn't find anything in relation to the maintenance of the quality. There's the quality, obviously, with the health standards, but the maintenance of that supply, and particularly in urban reticulated areas in relation to our ailing and ageing infrastructure. We do have in a number of towns quite an issue, which people may or may not be aware of, with their water supply, with grit and sediment into the supply of those lines. This can actually be addressed on the owner side of the inflow with a filter which probably has two effects in the sense that, I mean, all our taps today are ceramic, and for those of you that have run properties with lots of ceramic taps, you'll know that sediment and grit actually damages the ceramics and the lever taps, which causes them to drip, which is water wasted, which is high maintenance, and also unnecessary call-out fees. And I'm just asking you, where do you feel that this sits? Should it be in the building consent department as an advisory, or capture it with new builds, that people put a filter in and flush it on their side? Or do you, as council, have a responsibility to remove that sediment and grit with a filter at the source into our meters? And then there would have to be some sort of maintenance clause or terminology captured in this. That's my first question. My second question, and it does affect flow as well. If you get enough sediment on the wrong side of the inlet, it does slow your flow down. You'd be amazed how much grit comes out of those when you flush them. My second question is on page 39, and it's actually under charges. I couldn't find anything in relation to our ability to charge for drawdowns from public sites, you know, like our toilets, car parks, schools. We have a number of external taps and supplies that are available to the public. And I'm very aware and have received many complaints over the years of, particularly with the increase, obviously, of camper vans and caravans, freedom campers, and now people living out in the community. And when water is scarce and it's restricted, people are still removing, also from schools, they go in and take water from schools and things, but I just couldn't find anything for the ability to charge on those sites, and whether that's been discussed or considered. So they're my two questions.
If the staff could pick that up, Madam Chair. Roger, I guess it might be for Ruben or Jay to answer the first question, and then if you could pick up the second question, please.
Yep. That's for Ruben.
Ruben, could you pick that up for the elected members, please?
Yes, thank you. I'll attempt to answer it, and perhaps I've also got Calvin here, who has more technical understanding and engineering understanding than myself. In respect of the first question, the issue around sediment and grit, I mean, our treatment plants are required to meet a certain standard when it comes to removal of sediments, and that's to meet the standards that we're required to comply with for drinking water. Once it exits the plant, the water is required to meet potable standards, and so it shouldn't contain any sediment and grit. There may be issues within the households, within the fixtures within the households, that could result in issues along those lines, and that is a matter for, I would suggest, the building consent compliance, and it's part of the reason why we've included requirements for backflow prevention as well, to prevent contamination of our source from private dwellings.
Thank you, Ruben. I'm not sure if that's given Member Ward entire clarity on her question.
It just doesn't really. Thank you, Ruben. It just doesn't answer why there's so much sediment and grit getting through. Really.
Calvin, have you got anything to add to that at all?
I can only, good morning, everybody. I can only just add to, what Ruben has said, is that there shouldn't be any sediment in, once the water goes out the treatment plant, there shouldn't be any sediment, anything. I can only think of, occasions that where our contractors works on the lines, and there could be, problems that occur in that stages. But that's the whole point of having backflow prevention, is to, not have sediment, entering in our systems. So I'm not sure specifically. I need to understand exactly where this occurred, and then, then I can maybe investigate that specific area.
Can I just add to that? Am I able to just add to that? Yeah, thanks. So part 5 of the proposed bylaw does require section 31 fittings to be in good repair and for council to require customers to undertake repairs to any defective pipes and the like, and also section 32 requires the backflow prevention installation. So those measures are to prevent contamination to the households.
Thank you, Jane. I believe our General Manager of Infrastructure, Andy Finch, would like to make a comment very briefly before we move on to the next question. Thank you.
Through the Chair, I'd just really like to echo the comments from my team. We test the water quality to ensure that it meets the requirements of our resource consent as it leaves the treatment plant. And we believe that there shouldn't be a sediment or problem in our treated water. However, if elected members of the committee board have specific cases that they wish to bring to my attention in terms of potential sediment in the publicly supplied water on our side of the network, then I'm more than happy to get final authorities out to test that and confirm or otherwise rectify if need be. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I think that just reiterates to us all the importance of ensuring that our constituents use the request for service process so that that data is captured. If you're happy with that, Member Ward, I'd like to move on to your second question.
I think that does partially answer in the sense that we have had so many piecemeal maintenance on pipes in the CBD that would disturb a lot of grit. Thank you. I just want to that, you know, from the water perspective and saving the wear and tear on ceramics, which leads to landfill and all the rest of it, whether there can be something noted to be captured in the appropriate area if when people are building to actually assist them on the other side, not council side, just taking that environmental responsibility to actually advise people that, you know, when they're building, to put a filter on their side of the meter because they can catch anything before it gets to the ceramics. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So while you're in discussion, I was asking about this one. This one here is a tricky one because this is a supply agreement between us and obviously the public or the consumer, or customer. We are the customer in that second question. So we haven't really considered that as part of the bylaw, but it's a good point on what that looks like in the way of consumption and metering and what the usage would be at those council sites.
Thanks through you, Ministry. There's more and more focus on the user pays from my communities rather than falling on the ratepayer.
Yep.
Thank you, Member Ward, and I'm sure that point will be taken into consideration going forward. Did I have any further comments or questions? Otherwise, I'll move on to mine. I'm really mindful of the time. So I just had a couple of questions. My first one was around point E of the recommendation, authorise the Chief Executive to make minor changes to the treated water supply bylaw proposal to correct grammatical or spelling errors or formatting. It may just be the interesting way that my brain works, but I was just wanting some clarification that that is just on the proposal, which is what it says, and that it's not authorising the CEO to make changes and then that's the end, but there's still more to that process from an adoption point of view.
Yeah, I could give a first if I could, and that is that this is a standard phrase which is used to give the Chief Executive and staff a bit of latitude in terms of typographical issues or very minor amendments, but not in any way to change the meaning of what's been agreed. Roger, can you add to that?
Yeah, that's correct. It allows that to happen. Otherwise, we'd be out for public consultation and having to go through this process every time we made a minor change to a bylaw.
Thank you.
But if it's a significant topic that needs to be a change in the bylaw as part of an amendment or a review, then we should be coming back to you.
That's great, thank you. My second point that I wanted to make was really just a point of reiterating the importance of ensuring that we are resourcing the compliance of these bylaws as well, so connecting this work stream to the work streams of the regulatory committee. So it would be great to get an understanding of what the resourcing of these bylaws will be going forward as we bring them back online and avoid the revocation of them. The third point I wanted to make, well, it was just a question really. We have been undertaking some water sustainability work, but there's still a long way to go in that. We do know that reticulated supply is potentially our most sustainable option for our district, but we also know that it's not necessarily the most affordable. So my question is whether or not this bylaw is enabling to ensure that people who want to supplement from a non-drinking, non-potable, but collecting for gardening purposes and cleaning purposes and things to ensure their own personal sustainability, does this bylaw enable that sort of behaviour?
Could I assist with the second point and ask Roger to pick up the final point you made, Chair? I'm very cognisant that members have used have asked us to ensure that implementation and policy go hand in glove, that the left hand knowing what the right hand's doing. One of the things I've sought to do in the last 4 months is to work with the bylaw team and the project management office to ensure that all parts of the council are working in sync, because what we don't want are tough bylaws which cannot be implemented because they're not resourced. And I think we're significantly down the road in terms of improvement. All parts of the council are now talking with each other, and that resource implications are brought into the thinking when the bylaw is being created. Could you address the final point the chair makes there, Roger?
This bylaw is about the contract of supply from our network to the customer. The conversation, the wider conversation around the water report and the work that was kicked off, and a report that's supposed to come back about how we enable people to have water conservation on their properties with non-potable water. It's almost like a separate conversation, but this one was purely about that supply. So I don't see it as being disenabling or enabling. It's just that this is about the supply from that. I will say that part of that consideration of the wider water network is obviously the cost of your own on-site water collection versus what we do about improving the network. There's been some studies on that, but there's still further work to be done on that.
That's a great response. Thank you, Roger. At this point, we do have a resolution in front of us that's been moved by Councillor Stratford and seconded by Councillor Clendon. I'd like to put it to the vote at this point and move on. All in favour of the resolution? No. Those against? No? Carried. Thank you. And thank you for testing my chairing abilities on that one, team. Cool. Item 5.2, new parking and road use bylaws. Do I have a mover for the recommendation in front of us, please? Councillor Court and a seconder. Councillor Tepania, thank you. Will, if we could hand over to you for any comments and then we will debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I begin? And I hope I'm not going to embarrass Shan too much here, but Shan Smith is one of the finest report writers I've ever had the pleasure of working with, and she acts as a mentor for staff across the council. So I just wanted to put there that the quality of her work is first class. What we have here is a suggested way forward in terms of dealing with some of the really important traffic issues that we deal with. We've got two options before you, and the suggestion is to move to two separate bylaws. I'm going to ask Roger and the team to add any detail to that, if they would.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much, Will. It's kind with you. Just really briefly, similar to what you've heard about the water supply bylaw this morning, the Council's parking and traffic control bylaw has passed its review date. It will be revoked in June next year. So we've done a little bit of work on what the appropriate approach should be to regulate our parking and road use in the district, and what you have before you is a report that assesses the options and the issues, and our recommendation that we proceed to make two new bylaws, one that will deal solely with parking and another one that will deal with a whole range of aspects of road use. And I'm happy to answer through the chair any questions that members have.
Thank you, Shan. Councillor Foy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this paper today. I have already raised the issue about parking and how the new district plan will address our parking provision. For example, a lot of other districts don't have any requirements for minimum parking within certain areas. However, in order to do that, they need evidence to substantiate the fact that there's sufficient parking and to not require on-site parking for those for those businesses. This bylaw here, and I want to ask staff to correct me if I'm wrong, is related to council land within the road reserve. I wanted to first check that. The bylaw, since it's under the Local Government Act and the Land Transport Act.
Yes, yeah, parking on roads. Yeah.
Great. So I just want to highlight that when we're doing this bylaw, that, and I agree with the current recommendation, but I know point A or I and B. So the district plan and bylaws both work in conjunction. And just because they're a different department doesn't mean they shouldn't be talking to each other. Case in point, parking surveys. If we too have towns that have vibrancy, they should be making people, not cars. And so a key point of that is having centralised parking spaces that have people to be able to walk within 5 minutes of that, because people won't walk if it gets too long. So can I clarify in the bylaw from staff if they will be doing parking surveys both on public areas as well as private land that people can utilise or will in practice utilise as part of this proposed new bylaw?
With your permission, Madam Chair, I'll hand it to my colleague Keith Kent, who, as some of you will know, is Transport Planner and has the wider view of parking as a topic as a whole, as opposed to my focus just on the bylaw.
Keith, do you mind coming out to the front? Thanks.
I'll try and keep it brief. Yes, the things that you're talking about there, Councillor Foy, I would suggest are more things that will be considered as develop a parking policy. The bylaw product here is a regulatory item that will be the implementation of what we derive from the policy. So the policy work that we do is going to require parking surveys. Yeah. So how can you imagine the situation where we've got a set of policies for parking that we will gain agreement to, and we will need to develop an implementation plan. So this could take some time and come after the bylaw. So key here is to get this bylaw enacted by 17th of June next year, I believe. Policy will take as long as it needs to, and the implementation plan will be undertaking parking surveys, talking with the communities, possibly developing area parking management plans and the like. So that's where I see the further surveys coming in.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the district plan, the proposed plan, which we have legal weighting and will be enforced, will be in November this year. So the new bylaw will be enacted in June next year. So obviously the district plan comes first, which means that the parking surveys will need to be done before the new plan is created, if we will have rules that reflect the removal of minimum parking standards within central business districts. And the other matter for the bylaw is, what is the definition of central business district? For example, Waipapa, for example, Main Street Kirikiri, for example, North Park Kaitaia, for example, Main Street Kaitaia. I think that these need to be considered, as well as if our council is wanting to implement paid parking to ensure that maybe people don't park in the street all day because we only have one person to police that for the whole district, and our communities know that. So I just want to highlight this to the staff, and I'm sure the district plan team. I can't see them online. I'll be asking the same thing with the district plan.
Thank you, Councillor Foy, and I think you're just reiterating the need for our district plan, our bylaws, our plans and policies to all be linked and connected. Did you have any points that you wanted to raise relevant to the report and resolution in front of us, though? Any proposed amendments or anything?
I just want to clarify what the definition of central business districts is in part 2, and I agree with the current motion to have the two separate bylaws, but I'll be bringing up the creation of the bylaws these matters, so I wanted to highlight that to start at this point in time.
Thank you, Councillor Floyd. Will?
A central business district definition. I'm looking at my colleagues to see if they can assist. Sian, if you could help.
We haven't defined it at this stage. Just to reiterate, the request in this report is for the committee to approve us doing the work on the two separate bylaws. So matters such as definitions and boundaries and those sort of things will be developed as part of that. So for the purpose of this report, I just thought I'd use a relatively commonly understood term of central business district to give you the idea of where the issues are. So that's the issues. The issues are in and around our central business districts. Where we actually put the parking restrictions and what we call those areas, we'll define that in the draft bylaw, which will obviously come to you as the next phase of the work. Yeah.
Thank you.
There'll be maps too.
Thank you, Councillor Floyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This will help inform perhaps an answer to Councillor Floyd. Under the Government Road and Powers Act 1989, the authority to enforce parking on a state highway resides solely with Waka Kotahi, unless that authority is delegated to the local road controlling authority, in this case the Farmers District. So the definition of a CBD in the case of this report talks specifically in the report about our three largest towns, Kaitaia, and Kirikiri, of which one does not sit on the state highway and two do. So there are some issues in my mind about legal jurisdiction that have not been resolved. Yesterday I sent an email expressing concern that in this afternoon's regulatory compliance committee agenda, item 4.2 is an item parking enforcement services, and the report seeks to make application for the delegation to enforce stationary parking offences on state highways from Waka Kotahi. And my concern was how the two items can be considered in isolation from each other, because in my mind they are inextricably linked. And I'm mindful that not everybody who sits on the strategy committee sits on the regulatory compliance committee, sorry, at a senior moment then, and may not even be aware that this agenda item is up for discussion this afternoon and have not had time to read it and consider the implications on the matter that are before us this morning. And that raised the process question, which I did send through to Mr. Taylor and the Chief Executive yesterday, that the two can't be considered in isolation. For example, the resolution on the table at the moment is to look at a parking bylaw for spaces in the central business district that does not take into account North Park or Waipapa. Congestion in the central business district does not take into place other areas of the district that are experiencing significant growth, such as Doubtness Bay, Kaitaia and Waipapa. It does not take into account the ability for us to plan for the services should the delegation from Waka Kotahi this afternoon be granted. And as we haven't even debated that, I don't even know what the council considers on that matter. So I guess for me the question is to the Chief Executive is I want some governance comfort and about how we are going to merge these two papers together to make sure that we get the right result, because at the moment that is not clear to me.
Thank you, Councillor Cook.
I could assist with that in the generality. In terms of the Deputy Mayor's email to me, I always welcome them because they're always well thought out and they are forensic in nature. As it so happened, I always give a very proper response to members. As it so happened, my good colleague Dr. Dean was sat next to me when the email popped in after our management team meeting, so we were able to jointly put together a response. And the general response is this: is that the point that the Deputy Mayor makes is correct. We're not always joined up as we should be. However, if I've done nothing else over the last 4 months in the SP&P space, It's to try and create more joined upness. And the point I made earlier about the project management office acting as a bit of a catalyst, working with our bylaw production team, with district services, with Andy's team and infrastructure, to provide a more joined up approach is helping. But we're not there yet. But we're on that road.
Sorry, just Dr. Myberg.
If I may, Madam Chair, just to add to what Mr. Taylor's just outlined there, the report that goes to the Regulatory Compliance Committee this afternoon has a recommendation regarding the obtaining of, on a delegated basis, powers from Waka Kotahi to enforce on state highways. This is parking enforcement. The work that has been done in consultation, in collaboration with the team in SPP, in Strategic Planning and Policy, and also with Keith from a roading perspective, a roading engineering perspective. So we're confident that in obtaining those delegations in the report this afternoon, that recommendation aligns with the recommendations in this report, where the bringing together of the new bylaw, the work that will be done, that was referred to earlier, will incorporate the delegations that are obtained from Waka Kotahi in order to enable enforcement going forward in the parking bylaw on state highways. So we believe that the collaboration that has been done on this will allow for that, and that will answer the question that's been asked by the Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Court, does that give you some comfort?
The explanation makes logical sense, but it doesn't tell you with the recommendation in the report that's before us this morning, so it might need further in that, because the recommendation is specific and there it talks about addressing two problems: competition for space in the central business district and congestion in the central business district. And the recommendation might actually need to be expanded to include any subsequent transfer of delegations from Waka to Kotahi in relation to the state highway network.
Mr. CEO, did you want to make a comment?
Just endorse the staff's comments, just in the bigger picture for elected member comfort. Whilst the Regulatory Committee and the Strategy Committee both have in their terms of reference bylaws, as a matter of practice, we make sure that all bylaw approvals come through this committee so that we've got exactly that sort of joined upness that you were talking about. The chair of the Regulatory Committee's well within her rights, understanding that practice to ask for any information reports to do with monitoring and compliance, because that's the bailiwick of that committee, and it's under that assumption that we continue to support the chair. So that should help. It does help with us being joined up, but points are valid, and the first start to take away to make sure that we do not have any gaps between these two pieces of work at the moment.
Chair, can I just add to that, please?
Councillor Stratford.
Thank you. I just want to total call what Dr. Dean has said, and when I got these agenda reports, both the strategy and regulatory, whilst I couldn't see reference in the strategy around the work that was happening at regulatory does cite that this work is happening, so I was confident that what we're trying to achieve here is going to be captured in the work program. You know, because regulatory are the ones on the road doing the ticketing, and I don't feel that this is going to stop what we're trying to achieve. The agenda item, the recommendation before us isn't. So a central business district at the moment is anything in town, so even Werua on the state highway, Kawakawa, Paihia, Paikui, Kyle. So our workload for district services is going to get bigger.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Stratford. Councillor Court, does it give you comfort that both this paper and the regulatory paper are recommendations to Council? So perhaps the points that you've raised could be captured within the report that then goes to Council with both of these recommendations?
Madam Chair, if I write a reply as the mover of the motion, can I express my concern that I'm talking to an item that some of my colleagues in this room have not had the opportunity to see. So they're probably sitting here thinking I'm not qualified to have an opinion because I haven't read and seen the report. And that brings into mind the delegation. So I raised this yesterday, and if you look at the compliance schedule for strategy, it talks about your delegation is leading the development and review of council's policies and district bylaws when and as directed by council. And if you look at the same delegations in the Regulatory Compliance Committee agenda, it talks about recommend the development and review of council's regulatory practices and policies and district bylaws and make a recommendation on the bylaw. And the statements conflict with each other, and I think it's led us to a situation where we have, with really good report from Sian on the bylaw and an equally excellent report on from Rochelle Dean, and they're not talking to each other. And it may very well be, with respect to Dr. Dean and Will, that you're having that conversation at an SLT level, but they're not visible to me at a governance level. And so it's led to a whole raft of emails yesterday and a rather confusing debate this morning. And I do think that we need to tidy this up. Prior to adopting the bylaw resolution, because we don't know how that might need to be modified depending on where the debate this afternoon goes. So I don't have governance comfort at this point in time, Madam Chair, and I apologise for that.
No need to apologise. Do you have a suggestion of solution to give you that comfort? I'm not very good at thinking on my feet.
I don't have one. I would have probably appreciated knowing that. I just read it just now, actually. But even in our reporting, it had said the regulatory and compliance committee will be considering this item, which leaves them, well, like at a minimum, maybe. But I did read it in.
Can I just ask a question?
Just quickly, I'm aware Mr. Taylor would like to make a comment. Councillor Stratford.
Thank you. So did you all know that parking couldn't be enforced in our towns on state highways? Yes. But did you, those that didn't, so you all knew that it didn't, because it actually used to be enforced. It fell out with a contract or a bylaw. So all we're trying to do in regulatory is get that back in. It makes no impact on the bylaw. It's just the delegations that we don't have. The same bylaw.
With respect, it does, because we must include the maps. So we go out and consult and we must include maps. Madam Chair, I'm going to suggest that the easiest way to address this is that it just be a direct referral to council and the reports be merged.
Yep. Sorry, just for my clarification, what do you mean by direct referral to council? That we don't make a recommendation, or that we just...
That the entire matter be directly referred to full council. I don't think we're in a position to make a decision today. Because we can't better the debate that will happen this afternoon with a different set of elected members in the regulatory committee.
I hold the viewpoint that this is a building block and that regulatory committee is a building block and that they will be merged to come together. Perhaps assurance for me that they will be merged into that council decision is probably a really good one. And understanding the timelines is a really big part of that, I think. But Mr. Taylor, if you've got any comments.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I am going to comment on the specific, but on the general issue which the Deputy Mayor raises, I think it is an important one. And one of the things that we could do with the Chief Executive's agreement is we could look at the terms of reference for the committees to see whether they are aligned and could be improved. That would be a big picture idea, and that's something we'll obviously, with members' agreement, we'll take that offline and do that. On the specific issue, from a staff perspective, Dr. Dean and I believe that what we have before us this morning and this afternoon are good to go, but we're in your hands because it's important you as governance have got confidence and comfort in the decisions that you make.
Councillor Clendon.
Yeah, I'm perfectly happy to go ahead with the recommendation as it reads. We did have a conversation in a workshop, I can't recall which or when, about the general issue of parking, and particularly in relation to state highways. Well, it's very well made. A lot of our major settlements do have state highways right through the middle, and also in the context of talking about stationary vehicle offences. I take the point it's not ideal, perhaps, to be doing things slightly out of order, but I think we're all sufficiently well informed, and there's enough crossover between this committee and regs and compliance that we're not going to trip over our own feet. I don't think it's. I think it's clear. I'm sort of persuaded in part because the assessment of our existing bylaw measures it against 4 criteria and it fails miserably on all 4. So we actually need to do something. And I do think the recommendation is sound. I take Councillor Court's point. Maybe we do need to review some of the terms of reference to see if there's any overlaps or indeed conflicts. But that's a sort of a separate piece of work. So yeah, as I say, I'm quite happy to address this resolution as it reads.
Mr. CEO.
That's, we can definitely work with that and can definitely respect the Deputy Mayor's points that are raised. Just for clarity, there are 9 elected members on this committee and 7 on the Regulatory Committee, and so the only 2 that are not inside the overlapping circles are Councillors Tiffany and Foy. So the problem is maybe smaller than we think, but nevertheless noted.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Member Ward.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm happy with this recommendation. I'm aware of the history of the bylaw and the enforcement in these areas, being predominantly in my ward area. They all run through state highways, most of our towns and villages, and most of them within 50k zones. There are car parks in place on the ground. There's signage in place on the ground. There was maps and they have fallen off, so they're there somewhere. And those maps, even in our CBD areas, are upgraded and reviewed, even through Disability Action Group and other things. And there is that timely process to get things remarked and in line with the policy so that it can be enforceable on paper. So we just need to bring it back, and I'm aware, I hear what Annie's saying, but I don't have an issue with this. It's just a case of tidying it up so that Michael Katahi can give that delegation back. I'm not quite sure where it went to, whether we were just doing it illegally, but it's all there, and the paperwork and the maps should all be there too.
Thank you, Member Ward. Councillor Vucic.
I'm happy to support it as it is. This is a recommendation to Council, and I see that's going to be a merging point. And it does provide Council some information how the feeling of this committee is lined.
Thank you, Councillor Vucic. I had a question just around the timeframes. There's a date in here of the revocation of the current bylaw of the 17th of June. I'd be really keen to just get an understanding of what the process looks like and a rough indication between now and then, just to understand when those council touch points are, the governance touch points, if possible.
One of the pleasures of working with the chair is that you always give us a bit of notice. Thank you very much for tipping us off. You were going to ask this question, makes it much easier. Roger, would you or the team like to spell out those timelines? Shan, thank you.
Thanks for that. As you can probably imagine, redoing the detail around the parking restrictions, even though we're just continuing what we already have in here, is a large technical job. In order to generate maps, we are converting the current manual Word description of those parking descriptions into GIS, and that's a technical task that's going to take a reasonable amount of time. I'd say at least a month and a half, perhaps 2. And then we have to, make sure that we've got all those things accurately reflecting what's out in the real world, as Member would say. So I would estimate we will try and get the draft bylaw to you, similar to the process you've done today with the treated water supply bylaw, so a draft bylaw with the proposal to go out for consultation, probably in the 3rd quarter. I'm not sure what your meeting dates are off the top of my head, but meeting maybe around September. I would expect we'd come back. That will allow us time to have the consultation period will need to be a reasonable amount of time, because this will be extremely high interest to our communities. And I think we would therefore want to run that through right till the end of the calendar year and give us the better part of the beginning of 2022 to do the analysis and get a final bylaw back to you before that drop dead. Sorry, apologies, it's probably not appropriate language. Before that final date in June next year. So that'd be my best estimate, Chairperson.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that response, Sian. And I think it raises the point that Councillor Court raised earlier as well, the importance of this committee getting an oversight of all of our bylaws and all of our policies and what that schedule looks like and those dates, so that we can start to get a handle on that. So I look forward to picking that conversation up with our new General Manager in the very near future. Councillor Stratford.
So just, it makes mention of the Hawkers bylaw, so I am wondering where that is in the program. And then, so I was on the community board in 2014 and 15 when we started to do the review, and it fell over. So please, can we make sure that we go through with it this time? We did a lot of work, didn't we, Belinda, on the parking bylaw back then? Yeah.
Yes, Manager. Yep. So it was around mobile shops?
Yes.
Yes. So I've mentioned in the paper that there was a decision made, I think, of this committee around about this time last year to make a new bylaw to deal with mobile shops and hawkers. That no further work had been able to be done on that in the meantime, but it is actually something that falls within the scope of this proposed second bylaw that I'm recommending in this paper to deal with road use in its entirety. So anything that can happen in, on, around a road is proposed to be picked up in the second bylaw, and that will pick up that previous decision around mobile shops and hawkers.
So is the first and second going to be September?
The mobile shops and hawkers one will be in the second, and the road use one, that might take a little bit longer. I wouldn't say that the two are going to continue along the same junction at the moment. The drivers for each of them are slightly different, but as we get into the work, we can perhaps informally through the chair give you some updates on timeframes. The road use one, I think, will take a much longer period of time to develop, because we're pulling together a lot of different topics from a lot of different existing areas.
Both are very important, parking and hawkers. They have impacts on, the way we can interact on the side of the roads and reserves. Yeah.
Yep, agree.
Thank you, Councillor Stratford. Councillor Collard, and then I'm going to close it off with Member Ward.
Yeah, look, I support the creation of the bylaws, but I'm concerned that we're perhaps in the past created bylaws for the course of just creating bylaws. What I'm nervous about is creating a bylaw that is a toothless tiger, and that we're not policing or following up on those on the bylaw, especially in parking and public toilets and Turkey are the obvious examples of you can never park. There's nowhere to park. Kaitai, not quite so bad, but it is still a problem. But if we're going to have a bylaw, we've got to work it, whether it's through the delegations or whatever our mechanism is to do that. And that is the only concern I have about it.
Thank you, Councillor Collard. And I think that's again that same point from the earlier one, the importance of getting the resourcing understanding at the Regulatory and Compliance Committee, so that we can understand whether or not we are creating toothless tigers, because I don't think that's the willingness of this council, is to undertake that process. So thank you. Member Ward.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Just on that topic, as Councillor Stratford said, we did do a lot of work on these bylaws, and this is where I hear Anne, is that they are all interlinking, and every season I uncover a grey area, and shopkeepers, hawkers usually have vehicles and relate to the parking bylaw, but buskers became a grey area. So we're constantly, coming up against unenforceable areas. In alfresco dining as well, as Vicky said, we've got conflict there with road reserve areas and potential open space, road reserve or car parking areas being used. So they do all interlink, and we're aware of it, but how you actually bring those together, it's a bit of a beast if you start sticking them together. But it will address some of those other issues, perhaps when we touch on the other bylaws. But it's like car parking spaces. It's just a piece of ground that the use can change rapidly and enforced over weekends, often on public holidays. That poses an issue because that's their business that they are used. So perhaps we just need to get some additional headings and charges and fees that we can enforce while considering the discussions. But on with that, we need a whole list of the bylaws, and we're working from a board. We did get some through with regards to service contracts and things, but we do need all those times because everything's been revoked and it's all sitting in limbo and half of them don't exist. We need to get a timeline as to, how we can tie them all up together.
Thank you, Member Ward. Do I have any closing comments, further questions?
We just pick up Member Ward's point. As a resident of here, I'm only too well aware of the issues that she raised, and I'm going to ask Sham outside the meeting if we can pick up on those matters. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And that we have a resolution in front of us moved by Councillor Court, seconded by Councillor Tempanier. All in favour of the resolution? Aye. Those against? Councillor Court, would you like that recorded? Thank you. Just a point of clarification, as the mover of the resolution, is that an issue? No. Thank you. Learning for me. So that resolution is now carried. I'm aware that it's now 5 to 11. We've done very well in stretching those 2 reports. We have a further 2 reports, but I'm going to take the opportunity now for a quick 10-minute break, coming back here at 11:05. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
agenda item 5.3, control of on-site wastewater disposal systems. We have a recommendation in front of us that the Strategy and Policy Committee make the following recommendation to Council, that Council agree under section 155/1, I don't know how to read those, bracket 1 bracket, of the Local Government Act 2002, a bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing problems related to the maintenance of on-site wastewater disposal systems in the Far North. Do I have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Court, seconder please. Councillor Vucic, thank you. Will, at this point, I'll hand to you for any staff comments.
Thank you, Chair. Another very important bylaw, and this one, as you know, revokes in May 2022. We're looking to create a new bylaw which is in line with current legislation and council policies. And without further ado, I'm going to ask the report author, Brian Mackin, if she would say a few words, Chair.
Good morning. So yes, thank you for that. This bylaw will auto-revoke in May next year, and we currently have about 15,500 on-site wastewater disposal systems in the Far North. And the problem that this bylaw is trying to address is that failed on-site wastewater systems lead to effluent discharge. And the main reason for a failed system is poor maintenance, so the bylaw regulates the maintenance of on-site wastewater systems. The current bylaw has been very effective in doing that, and so this report is recommending that we make a new bylaw that regulates the maintenance of on-site wastewater systems. I'm happy to answer any questions through the chair.
Thank you, Brian. Councillor Court as mover of the resolution. Would you like to open us?
Madam Chair, I'm sure the room will be delighted to know that I have no questions.
Thank you, Councillor Court. Councillor Vucic is the seconder. Do we have any questions or comments?
Just a few notes. I noticed that a survey was done during 2002-2003, which gave some of these figures. That's almost 2 decades ago, and I was just wondering how they changed. Have any feel for how they've changed? I agree with this bylaw, as you probably gather. And also, so just how has it changed? And also, it's said in times of storm, where that said there's been a lot of in the stormwater samples due to lack of maintenance of on-site wastewater disposal. So it's a serious problem. I presume that's stormwater is urban stormwater, and therefore is the failure primarily from our public systems, or is it our septic systems? Because I wouldn't expect many septic systems in our urban stormwater area. So I could be making some assumptions here that are wrong, and I just want those comments. But in the whole, I support the approach.
So to answer your first question around the surveys being done back in 2000, has anything changed? So that was the original problem for the original bylaw. And so since then, our bylaw has been very effective at regulating the maintenance on-site wastewater systems. And so if you do have a look, there is, in the report, there are some graphs which show that the number of failed systems has reduced right down to 0. So yes, it has changed, it's been effective, and in the last couple of years, we've had no failed on-site wastewater systems. With regards to the question around assessing the stormwater samples, I'm unable to answer that. That would need to be a technical expert for that.
Thank you, Brian. Councillor Clendon and then Councillor Foy.
Just one question, just because I'm curious. It suggests that option 3, which I don't support, may require screens to be installed for more wastewater treatment plants. I just wondered why that would be. The only other comment I've made is that a bylaw is probably necessary, but I would hope it wouldn't prevent us from also running education campaigns to people about why it is important to maintain these facilities. Because, I mean, with the best will in the world, some people don't know, they don't understand. It's just something goes away and they don't see it again unless something goes wrong. So I would hope we'd sort of have some sense of an education program going on as well.
So with regards to the screens, at the moment, not all of our wastewater systems have. reticulated systems have screens, and so some of the waste is transported to different areas. And so in order to be fair with regards to if we were to go with that option and it was to come out of ratepayers funding, then screens would need to be introduced at areas closer to people's homes so that everyone's being fair in the rates that they would pay.
Councillor Pennington. Councillor Foy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I note that the bylaw relates to on-site effluent disposal and council usage, so it relates to anything within the rural area or non-reticulated to council's system. When people get a building consent, they have a TP58 report, Technical Publication 58, which addresses on-site effluent disposal in reserved areas. The primary treatment system is 100% reserve disposal, and secondary is only 50%. So that means that if this fails, they have space on their site in order to put the new system. I note in the bylaw, it talks about the type of on-site wastewater system that's been installed, and I found that really informative. The septic tanks, primary treatment. I know that that's most of our systems. So they have the highest level of failure, probable. I do note that we haven't got any packaged treatment plants for multiple systems within subdivisions, and these are becoming more common. Case in point, Kirikiri, and those that aren't able to connect to the reticulated sewage system, providing whole subdivisions with on-site disposal. I see this as a risk for our district, particularly with future-proofing future connections to the reticulation. I want to note to the staff that I would suggest that this be addressed as part of the bylaw, and also as part of the connections policy for the infrastructure committee, to ensure that any of those systems that are installed for packaged treatment plants, so basically a packaged treatment plant that's having disposal on the land, not connected to council system, but providing for multiple allotments within the subdivision, that the maintenance requirement is checked as part of the building consent or as part of the subdivision, and also that the connections policy, that we address the appropriate systems that council have approved, so that we don't end up having to carry the can per se for failure of multiple lots, which does increase the risk of the ratepayer. So I agree with the wastewater, on-site wastewater disposal bylaw. It works really effectively. However, I do want to note that to our staff, because I see this as commonplace going forward, because our wastewater treatment plants are so far behind.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd. Just before Briar does, I do note on page 62 that what you've raised has been brought up as an amendment to consider within the bylaw, the provision of decentralised wastewater systems, which I think needs to be applauded of the staff. But Briar, if you've got any further comments, please do.
No, and thank you very much for that. That was going to be the comment. And again, so this is essentially getting approval to do the work. And so what is going to go into the new bylaw needs to be discussed across the board of council staff to make sure that we do get that everything is looked at and that it does align with the district plan, because there are going to be some changes there. Yes.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Councillor Boyd. Member Ward.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Just on the top of page 60, item 5.4, the original bylaw that was made back in 2006 required assessment every 3 years, and 2010 it changed to 5 years. I think that when the review was done, when the bylaw review was done, that the strong consideration from an environmental aspect should be given to reverting that back to 3 years or considering a lesser time frame. I'm just aware of the number of, I know you're shaking your head, I'm aware of the number of persons living per household in the last few years in my communities has risen considerably, putting a lot more pressure on those facilities, and I think it's part of our environmental responsibility to look at the entire impact on these facilities.
Thank you, Member Ward. I think that will be it's noted that further investigation is required to assess if 5 years is an appropriate maintenance schedule. I'm aware as a owner of a biocycle system, I have to maintain that every 1 year under the maintenance contract with our manufacturer. So I look forward to seeing that investigation work done in the next stage of this process. Councillor Collard, did you have a comment or question?
Oh, no, I was probably looking at the same thing and suggesting that one size doesn't fit all in terms of 3 or 5 years in terms of those facilities or those septic tanks is what we're talking about. In my case, there's only 2 people live in our house, and there's quite a few houses around with older people where there are only 1 or 2 people, and probably 10 years ago.
Thank you, Councillor Collard. Did I have any further questions? Councillor Strickland.
Yeah, I've written down in my notes a question mark next to timeline, but I'm not sure if I've just not read it or whether it's in a previous agenda item or, from another committee meeting.
Different place within this report. Next steps, bottom of page 51.
Oh, thank you.
Let me know if that's enough information for you.
Yes.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you. Any further questions, comments before I put it to the vote? No. Thank you, Brian, for this report and the fantastic work that you've done in this space. We have a resolution in front of us, moved by Councillor Court, seconded by Councillor Vucic. The resolution is on the screen. I'll put it to the vote. All in favour, say aye. Aye. Those against? No. Carried. Fantastic. Well done, team. It brings us to the last item on our report, on our agenda today. Item 5.4, review of psychoactive substances local approved products policy 2014. The recommendation in front of us is that the Strategy and Policy Committee make the following recommendation to Council. That Council A, agree that the psychoactive substances local approved policy has been reviewed. B, agree that the psychoactive substance local approved policy should continue without amendment. Do I have a mover for this recommendation, please? Councillor Court, seconded by Councillor Stratford. Thank you. Just before I hand over to Will, I do want to make the point to everyone, page 74 of the agenda, point 4.3 states, currently there are no approved products available for sale, therefore there are no additional problems relating to psychoactive substances. And point 5, review of policy states, currently there are no approved products, no licence applications for retailing, manufacturing or wholesaling products have been received by the Psychoactive Substances Regulatory Authority, just to put this policy into context. Thank you, Mr Taylor.
I think, Chair, that the points that you've just made there are the ones which need to be recognised by members. At the present moment, this is a non-issue. At the present moment, although clearly legislation can change over time. So we believe that what we have in place currently is fit for purpose going on in the future. If Brian wants to add any comments to that.
I just would like to add that the policy is currently of a high standard and follows best practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Councillor Court is mover of the recommendation.
No comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stratford.
Thank you. I was engaged by a member of the public over alcohol being a psychoactive substance, but psychoactive substances, so there's an Act 2013, Psychoactive Substances Act 2013 and Section 9G, alcohol, whilst it is a substance, it's not covered under that Act because it's got its own Act. So and I feel that the Sale of Liquor Act has alcohol pretty well covered. Doesn't need us to take it into account under this policy. But I did want to just check in because there was a part in here somewhere it said something about the processes and delegations need to ensure that they're in place.
Please elaborate on that, or can somebody elaborate on that, please?
So the policy currently says that the policy will be monitored by the environmental. Yes.
Yep.
And so the job title has since changed, and so rather than amend the policy, we're just putting in place some delegations that still will stay with Dean's team. It's just that the job title.
Okay. But I'm still seeking clarity that although the job title will change, that there is somebody doing that. You know, like if someone to send in an application, there is a process in place.
Yeah, so we don't administer the licenses, it all happens by the authority. Yeah. And so, and we don't enforce, there's no infringements or anything like that. The only monitoring that we could do is to ensure that the authority is adhering to our policy when they grant the licenses. And yes.
Do you believe that there's been any, like, do we need to look at that? Like, see?
There has been no approved products.
Okay.
And so.
Yeah.
No. But if in the future there ever was an approved product, then yes, we would want to see that the authority has been implementing our policy as intended.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stratford. Member Ward.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know where to start on this, but I was all over this, how we cannot have, what has to be approved under the approved policy? Because according to Hoyle, alcohol is, and there's no mention of vaping or any, I mean, our communities are full of psychoactive substance users, and yet we don't have any.
So this policy, if you just note on the first page, it says an approved product is defined as a psychoactive product approved by the authority under section 37 of the Psychoactive Substances Act 2013. So it only applies to those products, of which there currently are none.
So the policy is if there should be some, is that what we're saying?
Yeah, so if a product was to be approved by the authority, then the policy would come into effect, yes.
So do we need to do a bit more work around sensitive sites?
At the moment, the policy is very consistent with policies around the country, and it does follow best practice. So there are some councils. It's almost word for word the exact same as most councils, and there are some councils that differ, but I believe that our policy is a higher standard than those that differ.
Chair, if I might, clearly if the legislation were to be altered, not just this council, but we would be looking nationally, LGNZ would be giving advice about best practice.
Yes.
Thank you.
Do we have to have this policy, Madam Chair? No, we don't have any, and we're not sure whether it's fit for purpose, because we can't measure it.
And that is, so the other option is that we revoke the policy. But if an approved product was to come on the market and we needed a policy, it would take between 12 and 18 months to create a policy. So in that 12 to 18 months, for example, we could have a retail premises opening up next door to kindergartens or schools and those sorts of things.
Thank you, Brian. And it is outlined in the report. There are two options, and the reasonings for both of those has been given. The recommendation is for option one. So I'm satisfied that those reasonings have been covered. Mr. CEO, did you want to make a comment?
No, thanks, Madam Chair. That point that I just made is the one I was going to make.
Fantastic, thank you. I just had a question around what that process, and I think you've kind of just covered it off, Mr. Taylor, what that process would look like should there be one approved, because to Councillor Stratford's point that has been raised in the report about the reference to the delegation, and also within the there is reference to the district plan, but it's the current district plan, so I had some queries around once we move into a new district plan, how that would sit with the sensitive sites and things. So my question is, what is the process to review this should a product be approved? Is there an automatic trigger, or do we need to capture that from a governance point of view?
If I could kick it off and Brian fill in any detail on this. if the legislation were to change in this area, it would be a matter of great public interest. People would be talking about it, would expect elected members to do something in this space. What would happen, in my view, is that LGNZ would take this as a matter of national priority, and that they would be giving guidance as to what good practice and best practice looks like, given the changing legislative landscape. Brad, could you add anything to that?
No, I think that's exactly what would happen. And so if we can review a policy at any point in time, right? We don't have to wait until the next 5-year review. So if we even needed to review the policy before then, we absolutely could do that.
Thank you, Brian. Do I have any further questions or comments on this recommendation and report in front of us? No? In that case, I will put the recommendation to the vote that the Strategy and Policy Committee make the following recommendation to Council, that Council A, agree that the why am I doing this to myself again? Psychoactive substances local approved policy has been reviewed. B, agree that the psychoactive substance local approved policy should continue without amendment. Moved by Councillor Court, seconded by Councillor Vucic. All in favour, say aye. Aye. Those against? No. Carried. Abstained. Thank you.
Sorry.
Ah, thank you.
2 abstentions.
Thank you. Did I move too quickly through that? 2 abstentions. That brings us to the end of our agenda items. I had just asked for Councillor Clendon to give us a brief portfolio update on his climate change portfolio, being that he has finally had his first collaborative Northland meeting, and being that we have the time frame, so I'm going to hand the floor to him. Thank you, Councillor Clendon.
Thank you. This was very exciting. Yeah, just a quick update what's been happening. The first sort of significant piece of work, I guess, was we sent a joint submission from the 4 councils to the response to the Climate Change Commission report some months ago. That was a sound document, I think. It did generate a little bit of radu, dare I say, because some of the officers have been working on this, some of the council officers have been working on this for quite a long time. And then the governance people came in over the top, and there was a little bit of pushback.
Really?
I only raised it was all resolved happily, and I think we all parted friends, I'm sure we did. I only raised it in the context of saying that in future, collaboration is the word of the moment, and it's a good word. Increasingly, councils will start working together on major regional issues. And I do stress that I think it's significant that governance be engaged right from day one alongside staff. Not saying we should start meddling in their work, because we shouldn't, but I do think this threw up, it created a little bit of discomfort where it didn't have to occur. And I know I've been beating this drum for a while. Governments should have been engaged in this process months earlier than we were. The process was driven by NRC, and for their own reasons it didn't happen. But I just flag that I think it's critical that in future, where we have joint committees, joint collaborative efforts, we've got to have governance and staff roughly on the same page from day one, not coming in 12 months later and having some staff slightly offended because their work's been critiqued by somebody they consider a non-expert. And I am a non-expert in some regards, but I have a little bit of background. So that was our first bit of work. We, as you comment, we did finally have our first joint committee. Amy, McDonald, NRC, was appointed to chair the committee, which was, I think, a good decision. Deloraine Armstrong, who is a Tangata Whenua representative for WDC, was appointed as the deputy chair, which again seemed appropriate, an elected member and one of the Māori representatives. Our FNDC representative is Anthony Thompson, who's a chair of Te Uri Oho Settlement Trust, Chief Operating Officer of Te Runanga o Ngāti Whātua, and CEO of Te Kahu o Taunui, so a truly senior representative, and I think he'll do good work. The committee was pretty procedural, I'd have to say, just made some decisions. One, not difficult, something we'll need to consider though. The one issue that popped up was in terms of remunerating iwi and hapu representatives. And the default was to be the NRC policy, which was essentially $170 per meeting plus some travel funding. There was pushback against that, a proposition that these iwi and hapu representatives should be remunerated on an hourly rate basis, acknowledging that there will be work done by them outside of the meetings. And that does sort of take the lid off a little bit of a can of worms, frankly. I'm sympathetic to the point of view. It is the case that work would have to be done outside of meetings, but that is quite a significant shift to anybody's policy, and it set people back on their haunches slightly. So, as I say, that's something we'll need to have a bit of a think about, and it crosses over to an issue that's on our later agenda today. So that was an interesting point that popped up. The future meetings, the meetings are not quite as regular as I would have preferred, but we have our next meeting in August. Slightly prior to that, we'll present it with a proposed regional work plan around climate change issues. So hopefully we'll get something signed off in August. Then we'll meet again in November, then in March and August next year. We can call other meetings if they become required. I had a portfolio meeting with Donald Shepherd and Roger Eckers, which was very positive. They've been quite busy. We have to produce a policy because, of course, we can't do anything without a policy. And some of the funding that was signed off by Council May last year, the 120k, the balance of some of that money will be devoted to having a company called Informed Cities, and Simpson Grierson basically developed a policy for us, a draft policy. Ton of experience here, a chap called Donovan Burton, who I hadn't met, but a lot of experience in developing these sorts of documents in Australian cities, and there's clearly a lot of crossover. So I felt quite confident that the selection there was in good hands, and the funds are already allocated. New acronym, DAPP, Dynamic Adaptive Policy Pathways. We'll have a test later, so listen carefully. Basically what it is, the proposition is to run some pilot programs. We want community buy-in to the challenges of climate change and into the solutions. So the idea is to run some pilot programs with some of our smaller discrete communities to facilitate that community understanding what are the specific risks to that community, what are the range of possible responses to that, and how can council and community collaboratively come up with those solutions and implement them. And often it'll require significant spend over time in terms of adaptation strategies. So I think that's a really positive approach to take, rather than council in our wisdom deciding that, I don't know, Te Kao or Miti Miti or whoever, wherever, must do X, Y and Z. Put it on the table in front of the residents and say, okay guys, what's the problem here and how do we deal with it? So Auckland City, I know among others, is already applying this sort of model, this process, and I think it looks to me quite positive. We'll also be doing some work in-house around waste, energy, fuel use, all of those things. We had a very positive meeting with a chap called Pat Wall, representing a company called Carbon ESS, a company who works with a lot of councils, about half the councils around New Zealand currently. They offer energy management systems and data acquisition, analysis and reporting services, essentially. It was quite a compelling presentation. Since the meeting a couple of weeks ago, Pat has presented a proposal to council, which certainly looks very positive. Essentially, they will enable a lot of continual updating of our carbon emissions, of our profile, of the costs that have been incurred by that. And the proposal assures us that it will actually save us money in the very first year. That's not my decision to make, but personally I do think it's something that we could usefully adopt and engage with this company. Kaipara District, Whangarei District and NRC already do, and given we have a joint committee on climate change, it seems to be a no-brainer that we're all using the same reporting processes and systems. And as I say, my vote's if we do it, but as I say, I acknowledge that's actually an officer's decision to make about whether we engage with that. At the meeting we had Will Taylor, of course, Janice Smith as Chief Financial Officer, and Andy Finch as Infrastructure, along with Roger and Donald and myself. So yeah, that's kind of state of play at the minute. Any questions?
When was that last meeting? That one that we just mentioned?
Sorry. Your worship.
Thank you, and my apologies for coming in late. Representing the rest of us at the do meeting down in Clonborough on Zone 1. Incidentally, the remit's going to move forward, but for those of you who have taken an interest in it, you'll want to be aware of it and give us advice or comments. David, I'm just interested in your comments, and we've got an issue, as you may be aware, this evening over in Monganui around the heritage area, where the community are starting to understand that there's some lines being put on a map that may well have an impact on them. And I'm just interested to know, with the climate change flood areas, how are we going to address that to make sure our communities are well informed? Has any thought been given to that at all?
Certainly, the release of the updated hazard maps has generated some response, and I think will continue to. I think there's still a fairly low level of awareness. As we know, people don't go
that's the problem.
Council websites and start hunting for hazard maps. No. Usually it's not because they want to do something, or they want to sell a property, or when it looks like it might hit people in the pocket. That's when they pay attention.
But David, that's the point. That's what I'm asking, and maybe Sean will have got some comment on it as well. I think we need to have a system that actually says to John Carter, by the way, are you aware of this? Just, it's up to him then whether he does make himself aware. I'm thinking of the SNAs as well, which is going to be significant. 40% of our nation is going to be affected by it. And somehow or another, we need to make sure that our community, and so we can put out press statements and so on, that people, quite honestly, a lot of that read. And I'm just wondering if anybody has thought of a way in which we can say to the individual, hey, you need to go and have a look at this for your sake.
Your Worship, when we had NRC come and present to us about the new maps, they made it really clear that all affected landowners would be getting a letter in their mailbox saying that, because I remember we asked that question, so Madge made it really clear that everyone who was affected by those changes under the mapping would be receiving a letter. It was an NRC activity, so I guess all we can do is support their comms activities.
That's great. I'm just wondering whether we can pick that up with the SNAs whenever the time comes and others.
Yeah, I believe the SNA letters are going out this week to landowners, is my understanding. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Floyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to John, Mayor, for bringing that up. I just wanted to highlight as well about the climate change aspect for flood zones in particular, which is the hazard that will dramatically change for our land use rules. The maps for it is one thing, the rules for it is another. So our council specifically decides on the land use rules related to the maps that the regional council make. Those need to be made clear to people that, although they're in a flood zone now and they don't have any rules currently under our district plan for developing in the flood zone, apart from subdivision, that will change. That is not clear currently to our constituents, and I think that people will be pretty upset considering how substantial our flood zone areas are for our district, and that they've increased as well. So I just wanted to raise that. We don't have any district plan people here, but I'm sure we'll pass that on to the team. And for infrastructure and climate change, which is a common thing across all of the councils, I'm wondering how the NTA is addressing resilience planning for a lot of our roads within flood hazards and coastal hazards in particular. And for our district council, our hazards that are in areas with our existing infrastructure. Case in point, within coastal hazards and all flood hazards.
I'll just respond quickly. I mean, those are very sound points, but everybody working in the area currently is working in a bit of a quite an opaque environment because we don't know what the future holds. We do know that the climate adaptation legislation is coming through next year. RMA changes, which is going to do away with district plans, as you well know. So I have some sympathy to start working very hard on documents and processes, which we know will cease in 18 months, 2 years, whatever. But we really have no option but to work under the existing conditions and options. But I think there's a critical awareness that infrastructure is, adaptation is the major focus of this joint working group. Mitigation is something we also need to attend to as morally and ethically as well as practically. But adaptation is where the big spend and the big disruption is going to be. It's easy to start reducing emissions. If you start talking about retreat or major economic costs imposed on councils and on communities and individuals, that's where the thing really starts to bite. But amongst all this, you've got to remember the most expensive route is just to pursue business as usual. Just be in denial, do nothing, and then the costs will be astronomical, you know.
Absolutely, and I think in year one of the adopted climate change roadmap, it identified that we would need to do policy work around that. So it would be great to get an implementation plan update at some point now that we've got more of a team on the ground. So that will be in the near future, I'm sure. Councillor Vucic, last question, and then anything further can be taken offline with Councillor Clinton.
Thanks, David. You sort of touched on what I was going to ask you the question there, maybe you can add to it, because it's so far you described the meetings and there's several meetings. What I'm concerned about is, and you also talked about government and others stepping on each other's toes, and it seems to be everybody wants to get into space, in particular government's putting out legislation, and they are, even though they've got an ETS scheme, they're putting out additional legislation and everything else on top of it, so I can see it's a very confused area. So my question is the scope and focus of the committee that you're doing. I'd love to see it help us and reconcile all of these things. So what is the best thing we can do as a council to find, to positively move forward in this morass? DADP, dynamic adaptive, what is it? Testing you all. I think fantastic name sounds great, but I hope you're measuring it so that it's just not another one of these things that we actually do. DAP, unfortunately, is a bit of an unfortunate name, I might add, because DAP is a fertiliser and it does release a lot of ammonia.
Well, I mean, this joint work program that's due out in draft by August, I think will contribute considerably to that, because I do think there's some appetite to get some work done, to do something on the ground, because the problem is not going away. And yes, I have an upcoming, not yet an appointment, but I'll be talking to the Minister hopefully for climate change over several years before very much longer. So if I get anything out of that, I'll let you know.
Thank you, Councillor Clinton. I'm going to draw our meeting to a close at this point. 11:43, team. Considering the first half of our meeting, we did really well. So thank you all for your vibrant participation today, and thank you to Will and to Sean and all of your staff. You've been certainly challenged and put on your toes today. You've done really well, so thank you.
Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
I was conscious by my colleague, Councillor Clinton, this morning. Yesterday, Waka Kotahi released a consultation document for new speed limits for the State Highway Network. Are we looking to submit?
I don't know, Chair. Roger, can you assist with that?
We haven't considered it yet. It's currently a consultation right now. There's some events coming out this week over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Councillor Cook, could we leave that in your hands to pick up through your voting portfolio as to whether or not we would like to make a submission through this committee?
That's with me, that would be good.
I think we're sure, because I don't think it's an elected member's call. There's it needs to be a collective decision.
The role that elected members play is spreading the word and getting people along to those days, if they could, please.
Yeah, I think yesterday's paper, it had a list of the sites and the dates and times of engagement. It's happening this Saturday up at Pack House, for example, the market and Kitty. My personal view is I have a concern that Waka Kotahi's agenda seems to be a blanket 80k speed limit across Northland, which is a cheap and dirty way to appear to be doing something about road safety. And I think it's a cheaper way than actually improving our state highways.
Thank you for that.
That's my entirely cynical response.
Thank you for that statement, Councillor Clendon. At that point, if I can leave it with you, Councillor Court, that would be great. And I'm going to close us with a karakia. So, inoi tatou. Kia hora te mareno, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou e te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou e tātou katoa. Hui e, tātou ki. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Yeah.